Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suisbuki. Coming up,
that flight really is kind of a lifeline to getting out of Niue.
a Kiwi family stuck in Niue need to get home. Also,
the price of infant formula here is prohibitive. It's about $45 a tin, which is twice the price of what it is in New Zealand.
Study shows grim health figures in Cook Islands children, and later,
us as Pacific within the South Island feeling isolated and not part of the main conversation.
Christchurch's Pasifika artists come together to create a unique album. A New Zealand father and his children will finally be reunited with his wife in Auckland after weeks trying to fly out of Niue. Air New Zealand's move to reduce its flight routes and capacity in October included flying out of Niue only once a week. BCN News spoke to Craig Ryburn, who managed to secure a flight to try and make it back to New Zealand in time for his father-in-law's funeral. Mr. Ryburn says at one point they were considering sailing home. BCN News editor Esther Pavihi has the story.
Craig Ryburn and his family became desperate to secure seats on the single weekly flight to New Zealand earlier this month when they received news that his father-in-law was ill. After no luck with Air New Zealand, they looked at options to charter a flight or sail out of the country. Ryburn's wife only managed to secure a seat 2 weeks ago when one was made available for her.
You know, we're kind of a sailing maritime family. We looked at whether yachts we could sail out on. We looked at whether there was going to be an option to get on the supply ship as well, but the timing again for that didn't work.
It comes after the second weekly Air New Zealand flights concluded in October, marking the end of the tourist season, returning to a single flight per week from the 2nd of November. Since then, people have been on wait lists for seats to travel out of Niue. Craig Ryburn says that he is grateful for the assistance from local Air New Zealand agent Peleni's Travel, but there was really nothing they could do. This speaks to the isolation of Niue with just one flight per week.
In some ways, I suppose it's the reality of here, that it is an isolated community, and that flight really is kind of a lifeline to getting out of Niue.
BCN News reached out to Air New Zealand for comments on the wait list and received a statement from Brent Roxburgh, who said that due to the maintenance requirements and the lack of engine availability, this means that Air New Zealand aircrafts that operate this route are spending more time on the ground than anticipated. As a result, he said Air New Zealand have 5 Airbus aircrafts out of service, which meant they had to make adjustments to their flying schedule across their network. Roxburgh, who is the head of Pacific Islands Division for Air New Zealand, said that they remain committed to flying to Niue year-round, and they have added 2 additional flights over the busy Christmas-New Year period to accommodate customers travelling to and from Niue. Sadly for Craig Ryburn and his children, they were unable to make it back in time before his father-in-law passed. But for the father of 2, he says he's glad that they will be back in New Zealand in time for his funeral.
A recent study in the Cook Islands has revealed a staggering 80% of children under 15 have poor oral health and are showing early signs of non-communicable diseases. Health officials in the Cook Islands are taking steps to improve the health of the nation's younger citizens, turning their focus to the critical first 1,000 days of a child's life. Coco Lance reports.
Over the past 2 years, the Cook Islands Ministry of Health conducted a series of screenings in schools across the country. The screenings included physical health, oral health, and rheumatic heart disease checks. Some of the findings have raised concerns, particularly with oral health. Health Secretary Bob Williams says an urgent need for change became clear.
Children in ECE grade 1 and 2, there's 100% issues with their teeth. Even for children in primary schools, we're looking about 80%. And some of the children, even at 15 years of age, are now pre-diabetic and some other health conditions as well.
Another key concern is the prevalence of non-communicable diseases, or NCDs, in the Cook Islands. According to Mr. Williams, almost half of the adult population, 52%, are currently living with NCDs, a figure he says is deeply worrying. Williams says the ministry are looking at improving nutrition in the first 1,000 days of a child's life.
We need to strengthen how we care for our babies since birth in the first 1,000 days to ensure that babies get the best healthy meals that they need to grow to be a healthier baby and young child when they are growing up and going into the schools.
Williams says healthier babies equal healthier adults. A key component of the efforts is the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative, which is a World Health Organization UNICEF project to ensure breastfeeding is promoted, protected and supported. Karen Palmer, a New Zealand midwife and lactation consultant, is in Rarotonga to establish the initiative.
BFHI was birthed in the 90s after several decades of high intervention rate with birthing and newborns, and many countries just about lost breastfeeding altogether. Their infants being formula fed while the parents could afford it, and then when they couldn't afford it, these infants would perish from malnutrition.
Mrs. Palmer says the World BFHI guidelines were created to stem that flow, improving maternity care and promoting breastfeeding. She says breastfeeding is essential for laying down strong foundations for health, not only in infancy, but throughout life.
And the goal really is exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months, and then introduce food and keep going. Keep going as long as you like. Breastfed infants are less likely to be obese children and adults, less likely to get diabetes, less likely to have heart disease.
Palmer says mothers who breastfeed are also less likely to develop various NCDs later in life. However, challenges have made consistent breastfeeding difficult for some families. In the Cook Islands, maternity leave is only 6 weeks. Many mothers opt for expensive formula feeding when they have to return to work.
The price of infant formula here is prohibitive. It's about $45 a tin, which is twice the price of what it is in New Zealand. Sadly, families can't always afford that, so they will then turn to something like Anchor milk powder, which might give the baby calories but not the nutrients they need for brain growth and development.
In the past 5 months, Palmer says she has seen significant growth. Community postnatal support services have been introduced, where a midwife visits new families in the first 6 weeks after birth to ensure they have the support they need. The Health Ministry are beginning nutrition workshops with cooking classes to hone in on the importance of introducing healthy eating practices from a young age.
The mothers love it. We've already seen an increase in breastfeeding rates, and it has really strengthened postnatal care in the community. To have this initiative rolling well is a big win.
Despite the progress made, there is still work to be done. Both Williams and Palmer agree that while the Cook Islands have made strides in improving maternal and child health, greater support and policy changes are necessary to sustain long-term improvements.
We cannot do it by ourselves. That's why it's important that we need to work with our communities and work with the parents and also work with government to introduce policy initiatives that will support the health and well-being of our children for their life course while they're at school, and also for their life course after school.
The Ministry are working alongside internal affairs and governments to implement policies aligning with their goals, ensuring healthier future generations of Cook Islanders. As the Ministry prepares to officially launch the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative this December, Palmer and Williams are hopeful that these early interventions will bear fruit in the coming years.
The latest Ministry for Pacific Peoples report shows the New Zealand government agency has failed to meet a key target. The ministry provides advice to agencies and is scored on the quality of their advice each year. Its latest score of its policy advice is 10%, half of what it should be to meet the standard. Lydia Lewis reports.
NZ Labour Party's Pacific People's spokesperson Carmel Sepuloni has accused the government of putting cost savings ahead of delivering for Pacific Peoples.
This is fundamental core business for the Ministry for Pacific Peoples. They provide advice across government agencies pertaining to Pacific peoples and communities. That advice then informs policy decisions. If they are providing a poor level of advice, then that is something that our whole Pacific community should be worried about.
She's blaming recent staff cuts on the drop in score, while an MPP spokesperson puts it down to the review being done by different people.
This is the first year since 2021 that we've had an independent policy quality assessment. The previous year was a self-rated assessment.
More than 50 staff have already lost their jobs in a cost-saving exercise by the government, which was acknowledged at Select Committee by MPP.
We underwent 2 organisational changes, and these changes were challenging.
After questioning the ministry on whether more cost saving is coming, Ms Sepuloni is feeling nervous.
The answer I got indicated that there is a very high potential for there to be more job losses at the Ministry of Pacific Peoples. If it's diminished any more than what it already is, then I'm very concerned that it will be completely ineffective and unable to do the job that our Pacific community need it to do.
MPP Secretary Geraldine Clifford-Lidstone reiterated no decisions have been made just yet.
We're still working through the process for Budget 25.
But Ms Sepuloni says even the thought of slashing more jobs is concerning.
If it's diminished any more than what it already is, then I'm very concerned that it will be completely ineffective and unable to do the job that our Pacific community need it to do.
While an MPP spokesperson says the policy team has been left relatively unscathed in the last bout of job losses, an Auckland-based Pasifika community leader says he's noticed a drop in community engagement. Pakilau Manase Lua says things are going to get worse before they get better.
It's noticeable. I'm quite well networked and I'm all over the place in the Pacific community, and I rarely see staff from the Ministry of Pacific People at these forums, and also they're not holding consultation whanau as they used to. Our communities are in distress because of the budget cuts.
An independent Pacific consultant, David Vaiafe, agrees. He says marginalised communities are suffering in the name of a balanced budget.
The government is determined to have a balanced budget and do away with what they feel is not needed. Unfortunately, those that suffer are the marginalised communities of New Zealand society, and that includes Pasifika.
On the end-of-year report failings front, Mr Vaiafe is not surprised.
There is no way that any department could deliver on the outcomes that it was mandated to deliver when you lose 35% of your workforce and a fair chunk of your budget.
He says what needs to happen is for budget cuts to stop and for funding to be put back where it's needed.
A new album coming out of Christchurch is all about being a Pacific artist in the South Island and not being in the bigger Pasifika populations in the North Island. Conversations on the Edges of Rooms is a compilation album from 12 Christchurch Pacific artists sharing original songs across a variety of genres including country, hip-hop and spoken word. Caleb Fotheringham met some of the artists.
One man call me enemy, 10 men come to break me. I hear my people calling for change. People, my people.
That's Solomon Smith, one of the people who led the project. He says the Christchurch Pacific arts community feels disconnected from a lot of the action.
It's basically about us as Pacific within the South Island feeling isolated and not part of the main conversation that happens within the bigger populations of Pacific within New Zealand and Wellington and Auckland. So the conversation on the edges of rooms is like the exciting conversation that no one sort of talks about, but it's the place that people want to be.
Ana Mulipula, one of the artists who goes by the stage name Kalasiana, says the album title speaks to the fact that Christchurch is sidelined from the wider Pasifika music scene. However, she feels she has also chosen to avoid the spotlight herself in the past.
I've actually sidelined myself for quite a long time. I have hidden under a rock writing songs for decades, and this album is an opportunity for me to actually bring it to life and put it out there in the world.
Mark Vanilau, who also led the project, says growing up in the 70s, Christchurch was very white with a small Pacific population. He says the community was centred around his church and he didn't know much outside of that.
The southern voices, the different Pacific voices, is quite different to the northern sound. and stories and even topics and content, the way that we think, the experiences that we have.
Today, he says the Pacific arts community is still small but strong.
It's still developing. What I do know about the Pacific community here is it's very supportive of each other.
Mr. Smith says Pasifika artists in Christchurch need to adapt to a smaller Pacific population compared to those in Wellington and Auckland.
What you're having to do as an artist is probably produce creativity that reaches far more than just, as you'd say, the Pacific audience, more of a wider general population.
Another artist, Karen Mara, says putting together the album was a cathartic process, with her own track being about how beauty can be found in difficulty.
From what I've heard from the other artists that are involved, it seems to be quite a healing album, and a lot of the artists I think have had life experience, so a lot of the writing is very authentic. So I just really hope that people enjoy it and can relate it to their own lives.
Oh, hear me, burn it all down, 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 down.
The album is expected to come out before the new year.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā, sui fua.